My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head to head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
For whatever reason, the joke delivery I find.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.
Discover Hydro, the best kept secret in fitness. Hydro is the state-of-the-art at-home rower that engages 86% of your muscles, delivering the ultimate full-body workout in just 20 minutes. From advanced to beginner, Hydro has over 500 classes shot worldwide and taught by Olympians and world-class athletes. For a 30-day risk-free trial, go to hydro.com and use code ROW450 to save $450 on a Hydro Pro rower. That's HYDROW.com, code ROW450.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
And in that one, compared to the slime tutorial that I've watched
allegedly
to prepare, allegedly.
For legal reasons, that's a joke.
I learned how to make blue slime. What are you talking about?
And welcome to Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. My name is Phoebe. I'm a dramaturg and story consultant.
I'm Emily, a classics scholar-ish. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Brendon, who you might know from the YouTube channel Wait in the Wings.
Yeah, that's me.
Would you like to tell the people a little bit about yourself?
I'm Brendon, and I make a living by geeking out over theater and theater history with my documentary series, where we talk about obscure shows that not a lot of people talk about.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we got to geek out earlier this year over the Lightning Thief musical, which I'm very excited to talk about today.
Yeah. We are going to talk a little bit about the production history and stuff as well, for reasons we'll get into. But first, biggest thing is, what is your relationship to the Percy Jackson series?
It was one of those books that I read in middle school. My mom always really wanted me to read, but this was at a time where I was like, I'm a teenager. I don't want to read books. I want to play video games. But Percy Jackson was one of the books that just really hooked me because it was so imaginative. I could care less about Greek mythology at that time, but man, I became those books made me an expert. And it's funny because we did a video on the history of Hadestown on the channel, and it's wild how much history of Greek mythology I could pull from the back of my mind history of Percy Jackson for that episode. But I read through all the books. I still have them all. They've made every move with me because I just cannot get rid of them. And they are, in the documentary, you get to see them, and they are very well loved.
We love a well-loved copy. So when you say all the books, do you mean the original 5, or do you mean all of the
original 5.
books?
I haven't gotten to like
Okay.
Heroes of Olympus and all of that yet. But
That's okay.
It probably won't come up.
and I shamefully admit that I did watch the movie like every Friday on DVD.
Oh,
It was
a
absolutely,
movie fan.
it was a guilty pleasure.
I loved the movie growing up.
Oh yeah, they are so just wrong. Like they are just not correct at all, and I love it.
Yeah, we just did our episodes on the movies where we had to analyze them like they were real literature, and oh boy.
Oh man, I tried for the documentary. I tried going back and rewatching the movie, just because I felt like that's something I should do. And I think I made it 10 minutes in, and I got to the scene where they're in the apartment with Gabe, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. This isn't right at all. Doesn't he like beat Medusa with like an iPod Touch or something?
He does.
Yeah.
And it's genius, and we love it.
That's cinema. Cinema.
We should also ask you what your relationship is to the Lightning Thief musical.
So I found it probably a lot of the same way that everybody else found it, like through the cast album. Had to be 2020 when I was working on the Beetlejuice documentary. And Beetlejuice the musical, they had the song Dead Mom, which is just so angsty. And then that would always bleed into Good Kid from the Percy Jackson musical. And I'd just be like, what is this? This sounds so good. And then I looked, and it was from The Lightning Thief. I went, no freaking way did they do this. And then that was really when I was getting back into theater and learning more about Broadway as an organism. Because I'd gone to school for theater, but I was really film oriented. I really wanted to do like TV and all of that, but it was a theater program. And after my last year where I really got more into theater, and then with the channel where I got more into Broadway, I got in right at the time that Lightning Thief was on Broadway, so I got to follow that whole odyssey through opening, through Tony nominations or lack thereof. And I've got this rule in place with the channel where I can't really talk about a show until there's about 3 years of a gap, because it's like, how do you tell the history of a show if it's still pretty fresh? So this is one of the newer shows that we covered, but that's how I found it. That's my relationship with the musical.
Ooh, well, so did you ever actually make it out to see a production in person?
No, because it closed when, like, early 2020, I want to say. Yeah, it was like a couple months before I actually moved to the East Coast, because I used to be in Utah, so it was hard to always get over. But I remember seeing the marquee, like the leftover marquee was still up, so...
To transition a little bit, though, should we talk about, maybe Phoebe, do you want to talk about your history with this show? Because it is extensive.
Yeah, I have seen basically every version of this show outside of the Broadway version.
Yeah.
So I'm not alone.
No, none of us have seen the Broadway version.
Well, who more qualified to talk about this topic?
I saw it in its like initial one-act iteration at the Lortel, and then again when it went on tour, and then I saw it off Broadway when it was a full 2-act show, and then when that version went on tour, I saw it twice, and then we went to go see the middle school version.
Yes.
I have so many questions.
At our local middle school. Yeah, I've seen it many times. I felt like a lot of my adventure with the Percy Jackson musical was me trying to understand whether I really thought it was like a beautiful, amazing show, or whether I was like being blinded by how much it was revealing about the books that I hadn't quite realized myself, even though I'd been like sitting there analyzing these books for fun for years.
Yeah, I do love this show, and the more I rewatch it, the more I find little moments where I'm like, this writing in so many ways is such a brilliant adaptation of the source material that it just, that's what I'm looking at, that's what I'm thinking about.
I've come to some conclusions about that question, and one of them is that like this is a brilliant adaptation of this book.
Would you say it's faithful to the source material?
Faithful
I
to
think so.
The heart of it, yeah. I mean, it's it's obviously very different, but I think that it, in sort of the way that the TV show is, although I would say the TV show goes farther, I think that it understands a lot of things about what's at the core of this series and at the core of some of these characters that really excites me. We'll get into it. So we begin. You're entering the theater.
Which theater?
Any theater. It's on tour. It can be anywhere.
I want to imagine it's the middle school production. You're entering your school gymnasium. You're entering the school library.
A storm is brewing overhead. One of my favorite elements of the show is like the pre-show storm that was brewing over at least the tour and off-Broadway versions. And then thunder crashes and leads us into Luke singing "The gods are real," like the Greek gods. And this is a decision that I have always loved. Like, we talked with Joe when we had him on the podcast to talk about his episodes of the TV series about this. But the way that this show uses the theatrical medium to its advantage when it comes to Luke is so, so smart. And I feel like it happens from, like, the very beginning to start the show off with Luke speaking to the audience and being the first to introduce the show and the world to us. We immediately understand him as our mentor and as our guide, and like this is our point of entry, and at this point we have no idea that it is a deeply flawed point of entry.
Oh, that is a good point. Because for me, honestly, my takeaway as well is I thought it was interesting because obviously if you're like thinking ancient Greece, mythology, whatever, and you see a chorus of people come out and all sing in unison, everyone's first, well, okay, if you're a nerd, everyone's...
If you're a real super nerd, you would say Greek
If you're a nerd like me, your first thought is Greek chorus. And so something I always talk about, though, is like not every chorus is a Greek chorus.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so a Greek chorus in the ancient theatrical space was sort of an audience stand-in, and frequently they would not be actors in the chorus. They would be community members, because if you go back all the way to the history of theater in ancient Athens, it was a tradition that began as a festival to Dionysus. So it would be essentially just a festival series of plays. And each of those plays would be sponsored by a specific citizen. And it would be a contest, actually, where whoever paid for the play, much like today, the best musical Tony still goes to the producers.
Yeah, it's true.
You'd actually win this bronze tripod. And that would be your sort of trophy for that year if you sponsored the best play as decided by the community. But the choruses would often be basically audience stand-ins. So they had all of these voices talking at once, and they're sort of intended to be like the voice of the audience members being able to interact with the play. And the choregos, the head of the chorus, was always sort of one, like it was a position of honor you would sort of extend, like if you wanted to celebrate somebody, like, you know, like an upstanding citizen or whatever, like, oh, that general that guy just fought a great battle, let's make him the choregos. But what's interesting though is this chorus I do feel is a Greek chorus, because I do think they are kind of acting almost as, or rather a direct line of communication to the audience in this moment, because they're all coming up being like, this is what's happening. Although in a lot of Greek plays, that role is filled by a god character. They'll come out and be like, this is what's happening.
Yeah, that's going to be the next version of The Lightning Thief.
I know, just get like Poseidon come out and be like, hey.
Open up with Mr. D. I mean, just have him come out and just start yelling, like right at the beginning, like throwing chairs everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I bring this all up because I was having some thoughts about theater as a medium for this story, because I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting also how the history does play into it.
Well, it's like, I just think of... It's such a stupid comparison. But has anyone seen Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark?
I've seen the documentary on it.
Okay, so like based off of what you're saying about how the Greek chorus operates, it's like, man, the director Julie Taymor was wild for thinking we should have a Greek chorus in this show.
Yeah.
Famously titled The Geek Chorus. But like they do operate under like what you're saying is a Greek chorus. Mm-hmm. So props to Taymor. It was a wild idea. I don't really think it worked, but at least it was accurate. Because they'd come out and be like, oh, wow, I can't believe the Green Goblin's dead. Well, he's not really. And then they'd go into like the next bit. And I'm sure that's what a lot of audience people were thinking. Yeah. Well, they were probably thinking, can I go home yet?
Yeah.
It's interesting here, though, that they are all in the main costume that we're going to see them in for the rest of the show in the Lightning Thief musical. And so like it becomes that character. Like they start out as a chorus of maybe anonymous children, maybe the actual characters, but as soon as the actual character comes on, you're like, oh, I saw you earlier. And so it's like they step out of chorus and into like individual people.
Yeah.
How do you think having Luke be the first person that we meet affects his status as like being a red herring? Or, like, does it make him a red herring? With Luke being the main villain, how is it by having him come out first?
I think it establishes a line of trust with him because he's the first one that you're seeing and he is your introduction. And also, immediately after his line, you have Annabeth, maybe anonymous chorus member, but Annabeth, come up and finish his sentence for him and say, like, after the gods are real, like the Greek gods, she says, like the ones you learned about but weren't paying attention to. Which very Annabeth to just assume I wasn't paying attention in class. Like, okay. But then both of them together say, well, they don't pay attention to you either, especially if you're their kid. And I feel like, well, first of all, it's like, what an attitude to begin with. But it's also...
Sets the tone.
Yeah, it's also these two are leading characters, and we present them as on the same side of the issue. And then after this, we get some of the other principals, and they're all singing the same idea in our heads, so it's not really setting Luke apart except for as our initial narrator and entry point.
There is an interesting change as well in starting this way from the book and from the other versions we've seen of this story, because we've talked a lot about how it's Percy telling his story in other versions. But I thought it interesting as well, when you shift to the chorus, they're singing, "It's time you heard our story."
Yeah.
It was interesting because Percy is narrating, and he's giving even a lot of his narration from that first page of the book. But it doesn't feel as much like he's telling the story anymore because of this moment, and it feels more like a collective.
Yeah, which I think that's good for the purpose of theater, where it's like it's this communal experience of we all come together to tell the story. So I love that they bring everybody in.
And I was thinking a lot about, a lot of these conversations around Percy being a narrator that we've had have also been about why is Percy telling his story in each individual medium. And so this framing of Percy coming in, to me, I felt that it was presenting the story as told out of a need to be heard and to be seen by the gods and by people who have been oblivious to this. And so then we introduce Percy as like representing all demigods. Listen to us, which I feel that this is a theme that a main theme.
It's like, it's a main theme, not just for the show, but like the history of the entire production.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, listen to us. Like that spirit transcends the script.
Yeah.
So Percy Jackson slides on stage and poses. Yep. It's a funny moment too in the like later versions of the show, because in the original versions of it, he came out and went straight into, look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. But because people would cheer every time he would come on, it then became slide on, pose, and wait for everyone to stop celebrating. Which, I mean, it adds something. It adds something to that character. He hasn't even spoken a word.
And then we launch into one of my favorite songs in this show, which is the opening number.
I love it, too, especially if you just know the story of Rob Rakiki, who was the composer, because he, in a lot of ways, was in the same spot that Percy's in, where it's just like you just keep getting overlooked. And so it's like, what do you do with that frustration and that anger? And it's like, how do you express that? And if you know that story going in and really listening to Good Kid, it's like you can tell it comes from a really honest place.
And I think that's something that gets played up a lot with Percy in this version, being like overlooked, of being like repeatedly like expelled, like that rejection. I felt like was like the main, a really like integral piece of his character in this version that is part of him in all the other versions, but like has never been brought to me like to the fore quite this way. It's interesting as well how Grover's to me very much more like combative in this adaptation, which I think is a function of the humor style of musical theater. But it's interesting for him as a character to me as well. Just like that, dude, I'm your only friend is so funny. Like, I love that line so much, but I feel like I would never, like other versions of Grover, I could never imagine saying that.
Yeah. Maybe movie Grover.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Now that I think about it, too, that is a pretty bold choice. Because Grover's whole thing is that he's, like, meek and confrontational.
Yeah, I would say this version of Grover is also a lot brighter, personality-wise.
Which it's like, how much of that is the writing, and how much of that came from George Salazar's presentation, the actor's take on it too.
Yeah.
Because like his whole approach to it, like even when he took over Mr. D, was like very confrontational. For Mr. D, well, we can talk about it later when we get down there. Just remind me that there's a story about Mr. D.
Okay.
To talk about like not just the writing, but the like stagecraft of it as well. When they turned to the Sphinx, I remember that moment seeing it. I was like, "That's the vibe. That's this show."
I have that marked in my notes. Also, the design of this show is so.
Is it what you would imagine a Percy Jackson musical would look like?
It makes so much sense. I think if you had asked me to imagine a Percy Jackson musical before this, I probably wouldn't maybe have imagined it like this. Maybe I would, but like the idea of having the puppets and a lot of the costumes, just a lot of the set dressing, all of it feeling very homemade and like it's got a small budget, which it does. It feels like a group of kids collaborating to tell their story and jumping in to play the monsters when they need to, jumping in to play 100 different characters when they need to. Like
it goes back to that first number where it's like, here's the group, we're doing this together, and it's really cool because the set is supposed to be it's like the Parthenon, but it's under construction. Yeah. And so all the kids come and they take it over, which is just really cool, of like a way of saying it's something that Joe talked about in his, like how he wanted to approach it, where it's, okay, here's how my parents did it. That's not the way that I want to live. Let's do it our way. And I think that really just comes through not only in the script, but through how they do the set design too.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was supposed to be the Parthenon.
Yeah. Or it's just like, it's like a Greek temple that's under construction.
Well, I was going to say, because the Parthenon is currently under construction.
So let's do an immersive staging of Percy Jackson.
God.
Anybody who's listening who wants to produce that.
No, what's interesting is the Parthenon's right. The Theater of Dionysus is right, like up. It's there's the rock of the Acropolis. The Parthenon's up on top of it, but the Theater of Dionysus is built into the rock. And also that Parthenon is sort of the ending point of the Panathenaic Festival, which is a huge festival to Athena, where like I don't think they did theater up there, but it doesn't feel out of place considering they would have had to do all these ceremonies and stuff. So. I don't know. It could be a show dedicated to Athena if you squint.
All the more reason. Let's get this on. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start a GoFundMe.
Yeah.
I do think doing it all in the Theater of Dionysus would make Dionysus's character and presence be very interesting. Because I want to talk about that too, actually. His role as the god of drama in a theater show, which I think they mostly play for just fourth wall breaking laughs. But I feel like, I don't know, there's something here. The joke he makes about the lightning bolt is like, this isn't Broadway. Like,
is he aware of the show in the way that the chorus members are?
Maybe he's stepping outside.
It's just that tongue-in-cheek humor the whole way through it is what makes it. Because you could have done like a super broody, like, let's take this so seriously, but it's a show that just knows exactly what it is, and instead of like shying away from the corniness, they say let's go all in on it. And I think that's what gives it so much of its charm. And stays really true to the books, like the feeling of the books, where the books yes, they get dramatic, but also they aren't afraid to have fun. And because it was a bedtime story for his kid, like of course it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, and I love the way the show uses humor too, because I feel like it doesn't take jokes from the source material in the same way a lot of adaptations you see. I mean, some are unavoidable, like Mean Girls, like you have to have all those iconic lines in there, like you can't not, people will feel disappointed. But I think for this show too, what's interesting is I feel like a lot of the humor actually comes from drawing out certain character traits and exaggerating them in a theatrical way. It's like a lot of Annabeth's humor, I think, comes from this thing in the book where she's very kind of cavalier with using people, especially towards the beginning of the series. And I love that, like, that's where they found the humor for her in the stage adaptation. Something else I want to talk about for both The Day I Got Expelled and later the Minotaur fight is the stagecraft there, too. Because the way they do fights in this show is so fun. And I didn't know this actually until we interviewed Joe, but I didn't realize that it was the actor who plays Luke is the Minotaur.
It originally wasn't going to be. It originally was going to be Kristen Stokes, who plays Annabeth. And I've got a great picture of it where it's like, it would be Kristen Stokes on top of somebody's shoulder with a Minotaur mask on. But it was just too complicated. But anytime that when they were practicing the scene, like she would be off of the guy's shoulders and she would still have the Minotaur mask on. So, and she's a little on the shorter side. So Rob Rakiki, the composer, would just come up and be like, "Oh my gosh, you're like the widowless Minotaur." And so on the deluxe edition of the cast album, the song, because he went in and he like went out and he wrote a song called "The Littlest Minotaur."
Oh yeah.
And he came back just for Kristen. And so that's on the deluxe album of cut songs. But there's just this picture of like her with this big head. It was a huge head. It was so funny.
Wait, so that must have been their first instinct for what actor because we need to talk a lot about the multi-rolling in this show. Like which actor, the choice then. So Annabeth is their first choice, I guess, for the Minotaur. What fascinating.
It makes sense to me. It's like maybe they're thinking logistically she's already on stage so that he can dream about her.
Yeah, I think a lot of the doubling up at first was just because it's like, who's here? Who do we have? Who can we use? But in the case of Mr. D, I'll talk about it later. I'm hyping it up so it's going to be like so unremarkable when I share this Mr. D story.
I think also this scene for me is when the day I got expelled, I was in, but this Minotaur fight scene as well made me really in. Because I think that's also the question, like when we're walking into like a big fantasy production that you look at it and you're like, this is a little low budge. How are they going to do all of these things they know are going to happen? And I think that Minotaur fight, specifically because of the don't pass out moment, was the moment I really was fully in it, I think, as a viewer. Because I think it married the humor, the stagecraft, and everything so well to me.
So Percy passes out.
And we transition to... I did enjoy the fact that the don't pass out is used both times, I think, to trigger the dreams. And I honestly, I do love Annabeth getting wheeled out on a cart. Like, I don't know what about that tickles me, but it does. Like, I feel like in a higher budget product... I don't know what they were wanting to do with that.
She descends from...
Yeah, like Glinda in the bubble.
Yeah.
But she sort of just gets pushed out in a cart, just staring at Percy.
It's so good. And I think going back to what you were talking about too, about that lower budget and fantasy, it seems counterproductive, but I really think that's the way to do it. Is just this is something that TheaterWorks, the off-Broadway company that produced it and really got it going, that's something they do really well, is that they do leave enough of that empty room so the audience can fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I feel like my dream production of this, where it gets a massive budget and gets the time to really work on it, looks aesthetically a little bit like the SpongeBob musical.
Yeah,
and the way that it's got these big numbers, but it's also got like set made out of cardboard boxes and stuff like that.
Like we're gonna use foam noodles for the barnacles and like that's the best example of big budget DIY. Someone call David Zinn and let's get him in here to design.
And I think it serves the story too, because I think it gives the audience permission right away to not take everything too seriously.
Yeah.
Which I think it's like it lets us in a way that I think a bigger budget production might feel unapproachable. But I'm glad it's going to get another chance to have a bigger production of it now. So I'm very excited to see how that turns out.
And when we do it at the Parthenon.
At the Parthenon.
Obviously.
Yeah, at the Parthenon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We wake up. We're at camp.
Yeah.
And then we meet Mr. D.
Yes.
I forgot what the story was. So it's a lot like with how Annabeth was originally the Minotaur. George Salazar, who plays Grover, also played Mr. D, but he wasn't supposed to be Mr. D at the beginning. They had a different actor cast in the role who was playing it pretty straight, but then he had like train delays, and so he was late to rehearsal, and George Salazar said, "Here, I'll jump in." And then he started doing like this big screaming like Lewis Black impersonation where he's like throwing chairs everywhere. And Joe Trace was just so sold on it that he's like, "I'm so sorry," to the guy who was late. He's like, "I'm so sorry. We're giving it to George."
It's the worst way to lose your job.
Like, thanks, MTA. And it completely changed how they were going to approach Mr. D. Because in the book, he's like a little bit more dry. And like he's not like screaming the whole time.
I feel like the way he is in the musical, though, is what Mr. D is in his head.
Yeah. Which then it's like maybe this is through the eyes of Mr. D. This whole thing, this whole production. That's not lore. That is not factually based in anything.
Well, I don't know. It's like he makes multiple references to him being the god of theater and drama in the work. So it's sort of like, and again, it's like if you keep breaking the fourth wall in a way that you're calling attention to yourself, like it makes me as an audience member start to think about it.
Yeah. That's fair.
I haven't drawn any conclusions of it, but I don't know. It was just interesting how many times it kept getting brought up, which I know mostly was for comedy, but
if Mr. D was once a hero, isn't he also sort of included in It's Time You Heard Our Story?
That is a good point. And I will say, one thing I clocked this time around that I never really thought about before was them including Chiron in the campfire story.
Yeah.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they ask him about it.
Yeah.
And speaking of Chiron, his reveal in this scene is so funny to me. The way he gets out of that wheelchair is so funny.
I love, because again, that's one of my big questions as an audience member who knows the material. It's like, how are they going to do the horse? And it's the funniest
in the best way possible.
Just stick a tail on him. Yeah. Chiron sings their sign. We've talked a lot about Chiron's attitude toward the gods, and I think this song does a good job of illustrating his approach to them, because he's saying at times in this song essentially the same thing that the kids were singing at the beginning. Like he says the gods are very real, although they often won't reveal what they want, who they are, their design, but he still insists that Percy have faith in them. Even though, like, later in the show, we find out that he's very aware that Zeus is not a great guy. So I felt that it was useful for that discussion that we've been having throughout these different versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We get a lot of him talking about his parent of Kronos in a way that he just doesn't bring him up very much in the books.
And we also, in this song, get Luke's, I feel like, real entrance into the story where he introduces himself and has all of these lines about, like, rejects stick together, very, like, on Percy's level.
Yeah, and I did love the transition, too, where Luke and Percy are talking and Luke and Percy are having this connection. And then we get that scene between Luke and Annabeth right afterwards.
Yeah.
That I think adds so much. Like, but before the TV show came out, this was the first time, and we talked to Joe about this a little bit, but this is the first time I'd seen any character interacting in the story outside of Percy's perspective.
Yeah.
And it, like, blew my mind a little bit, like, that realization when I first saw this production. And also, I think the reason why is because this scene completely turns the perspective of Percy's story on its head for me, because he's just had this moment with him, and then immediately they turning around and talking about Percy in ways that, like, we as the audience have never thought about him before, where they're like, I don't know about this kid, like you know, like things that are so natural to what these characters would be thinking in those moments. And also just shows how much history they have in such a short moment,
right? It's so useful, despite the fact that it's so short, in seeing it, to see these two one-on-one and get a hint of what that relationship is.
Yeah. And it also helps get you off the scent of Luke.
Yeah.
Where it's like you wouldn't imagine, like, this guy's a cool guy. He won't do anything bad.
I also want to note in this scene, at least the way that Kristen plays Annabeth, I feel like there is an anxiety there and, like, a constant recorrection of herself. Like, I feel like in this moment she has the oh, you think I'm tough? And then is like, I mean, how do you think he is at Capture the Flag? And then earlier in the show she has that moment where she's sitting with Percy and actually seems interested in talking to him when Percy first wakes up, and then as soon as Percy starts questioning things, she's like, oh, I need to get out of here. And so it's like a constant, like, correcting of herself.
Yeah.
Which, it's an interesting approach to Annabeth, I think.
Yeah.
My next note is, I love the Capture the Flag song.
Put you in your place.
Yeah, let Clarice sing.
How do you feel about how they deal with Clarice in this?
This is one of those things where it makes me wonder how I would feel about this if I didn't know the book, like didn't know the story, because it is a new character and she doesn't super come back. Like,
does she sing? She doesn't sing in the campfire song, does she?
I don't think so.
No, because she's busy playing Katie Gardner or something.
Yes, she's Katie Gardner. But I also kind of see her as, like, the embodiment of, you know, the sort of airy side of the camp almost, of just, like I think there's an interesting connection because as well of, like, this the material from this song that does get reprised both by Ares and then by Luke later, very briefly, where it feels almost like she's not necessarily, I think if I didn't know Clarice, I wouldn't think of her as a character. I would think of her almost as like the part of the godly world that is like, oh no, you do this, you fight, this is what you do, put you in your place, like this is your place, but derogatory.
A little stick to the status quo. That's what this song is.
Yeah, stick to the status. Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's sort of establishing the status quo and kind of establishing... Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think glory plays as much of a role in this story, in this version of the story, as it does in other versions, which we've talked a lot about on the podcast. But I think here is that little bit of that energy that I think Annabeth really continues throughout the rest of the show, like her desire to be remembered.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because if I remember correctly, it's like they had Clarice as a bigger character, but then just because of time, they decided, okay, we can't really have this other character on stage. So they took a lot of Clarice's attributes and gave them to Annabeth.
The classic move.
They were like, let's just combine these ones. That could be the movie, too.
I mean, that is definitely a criticism of the movie.
I think they did it in the musical, too, though. I think that they had to cut back a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that because Annabeth ends up being the red herring in the underworld. Like, she's sort of the original, she's sort of the only false suspect that they have in the show.
How does the bathroom fight unfold in the musical again?
So she tells Percy his special job is to go sit in the bathroom.
And he's perfectly happy to do it. That's so
and he
funny.
Goes, you're sitting in the bathroom, and then Clarice shows up, and basically it's sort of similar where she's like, I can't believe you fought a Minotaur, all this stuff. Like, I'm going to put you in your place. And the beautiful toilet paper guns emerge.
The best. Thank you, YouTube. Like,
yeah.
That was along the same lines as how are we going to do the Minotaur? That was early discussions was how do we do the water effects? Barbara Pasternak, who she runs TheaterWorks, she told the creative team right up front, please don't do like blue silk, don't do blue linen, don't do like the fabric, because that just looks so cheesy. So they tried that, it didn't work. They tried fire extinguishers, which that didn't work because you can't really refill them. And it's like you have to.
That's expensive, I feel like too. Like.
And so then it was the set designer who found it online on YouTube. He was just looking at videos, and they had those like leaf blowers with the toilet paper roll on the end. You blow the air out, and then it shoots it. And they were like, wow, that actually kind of looks like gives you the feeling of water if we light it right. And so then that's
and it's perfect because we're in the bathroom. Like it sets you up perfectly.
Because again, it's one of those those little decisions, but it makes so much sense because of where we're establishing how this convention works.
Yeah, and it's like setting the rules of the world. Up to that point too, they really say, hey, don't take it too seriously, like Annabeth coming out of the cart or the tail. And so when they pull out the paper towel guns, it's like, oh yeah, of course. I believe that because you've set those ruls. Whereas if it's like they've been playing it super straight and then they just pull out toilet paper, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Something I thought was interesting too was how Annabeth only makes the Poseidon connection after that in the musical.
Even though Chiron has his whole, that is to me, the prophecy suggests moment.
Again, that only proves to me that Joe Trace read these books so thoroughly, because that is exactly, I feel like if you can easily misread Chiron as somebody, it's like exactly the way he is in the show, where it's like, oh, so profound, he sounds so profound, he knows so much, but if you actually pay attention to the information he gives out, he's just like, whoa, it's useless. He'll tease it and be like, oh, bye. I love it. That's true. I think they use the comedy as well as a way to create brevity in the material in a fun way.
Yeah, because it's important to remember too that it's like, who was the original audience for this? It was like it was like kids. It's like middle schoolers. And so when it finally got to the point that they started doing it, it's like when they staged the show and like older people started showing up, like young adults and like 20 and 30-year-olds. They weren't expecting that. I think it was Barbara Pasternak was telling the story of it was at the first showing off-Broadway, the first off-Broadway run, that she was standing in the lobby and this lady ran in and it looked like she had just come from a finance job down in like near Wall Street, dressed up like head to toe and just really professional like business attire. She went into the bathroom. And then she came out a couple minutes later in like jeans and a Camp Half-Blood shirt and like was just so here for it. So it's just so cool how it was able to transcend those. But it's that spirit of that middle school spirit that was so key to the books, that I think that having that translate into the musical just really helps it.
So now, campfire scene.
Yeah, I've already brought up a lot of the things I like about this, but I do, even though it doesn't, I was interested why they introduced the pan quest with Grover. Because again, that feels sort of like maybe just an Easter egg for the book lovers, but I do love the line, like, what was it? It's like, he's not really my dad, except he kind of is.
But I'm sort of his child.
But I'm sort of his child.
And then the immediate tears. It competes with Chiron's line as the best line in that song to me.
Yeah. I also love that they're preserving the fact that Percy canonically can't sing.
I know. I think another point goes to this song for the way it ends, where it's Luke saying, I don't care where our parents may be as long as you are here with me. We've talked a bit about Luke's relationship to other demigods and how investing time in that helps make him a more sympathetic character and illustrates his motivations. And I like that the first act, I feel, leans into that a lot, with the way that he tries to help Percy, and with lines like this, where it's like, he clearly, in my mind, it seems, he cares a lot about the kids at camp.
Yeah.
That makes the end hurt so much more.
It does. And like, this is jumping ahead a bit too. Like, I love the fact that after Good Kid, it's like Luke that comforts Percy. Like, that moment is so powerful. Because I think there's a power to silence after a big number like that. And I think they used it in such an effective way, where it's like the calm after the outpour, like the catharsis, and then we get the, like, you know, the putting yourself back together moment, and having Luke be there for that and telling him about his own quest. It's just such a good place for that story.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about Good Kid while we're here?
Yeah.
This is a song that made me cry the first time I watched the show. Not when I heard it for the first time, but when I saw it in person, immediately.
I can imagine.
I find that it channels that really, like, self-critical and self-deprecating and angry side of Percy that exists in The Lightning Thief. But it also brings out what I think is sort of a new take on the character, with this idea of, like, I swear that I'm a good kid. Like, I don't know that the need to be good is necessarily something that Book Percy feels very explicitly in The Lightning Thief.
I think it's also just that, like, the expectations of you have to be a good kid that, like, really comes out. Because it's just everybody through the whole book is just always crapping on him. Like, and I mean, how much of that can you take until it builds up and you finally have to have that catharsis and that release?
Yeah. And it's that reasserting of it over and over and over, of, like, he just needs people to understand it.
Yeah.
Which I think goes back to, like, the very first song in it, where it's like they want people to listen to them.
I had an interesting thought too, because I was really listening to it. The most recent time I was listening to it, I really heard in the background too, at the end, the chorus coming in. Again, I know as, like, a person who writes lyrics, like, those are never, like, random choices. You're always thinking very deeply, not only about, like, what the main characters are singing, but also what's being echoed, what thoughts and feelings are. And the fact that they keep repeating, like, 6 schools in 6 years, like, that's the thing that's really, like, coming back and back and back. That's, like, the undercurrent of everything. And part of it is it's quite a hook. It's a good hook. But I thought that was interesting as well, that we're really, like, when he has to go on his quest, it's framed as him being expelled again.
Yeah.
So smart. Like, what smart writing. It shows us that coming to camp doesn't solve the problem of what's going on with Percy in such a smart way.
And that it's, like, not totally his fault.
Yeah, it's like this continuation of, like, okay, my life, like, this is still my life. Like, this classic Percy, like, getting kicked out again for things, like you said, that are not his fault. Like, he keeps getting put, like, again, I think the framing of the lightning bolt too, like, again, it's like he keeps getting framed as this kind of kid, and he just wants us so bad, as Phoebe said.
Yeah, it's like he's really trying.
He's not.
He's really trying.
Yeah.
After this, we get our Act 1 finale, Killer Quest.
I want to talk about one little moment before that. Not actually talk, just flag it. I do love that Percy says, "Oh, we're going to hell," and Luke says, "The underworld."
I mean, that's part of Killer Quest, so we are in it.
Okay. I was like, they wrote that for me and me specifically. Thank you. Okay. So it always grinds my gears when people think hell and the underworld are the same. No.
Yeah.
There's a moment that the guy who played Luke, was it James? When I think I saw I can't remember exactly which version it was, but the moment when Luke like gives Percy the idea, like, you need to go down into the underworld to save your mom. I remember this moment for him where he's still sitting up like in the rafters basically, and Percy's down there singing Killer Quest, and I remember the look on his face being so like conflicted and so like, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do, but I don't like that I just did what I was supposed to do. And I was like, what a choice. What a choice you're making up there when no one's looking at you.
That's just proof that you gotta, like, even if you don't have lines, you have to be acting the whole way because you don't know who's looking at you.
It's me.
Yeah.
You never know when Phoebe's in the audience is the reason. It was definitely a later version of it that I was seeing that I had that thought because I had seen it so many times that I didn't have to watch the people. I didn't have to watch the actual action happening on stage.
I don't know, the choice of like who to watch though, I always am so torn when I'm like watching theater. It's the reason why I kind of enjoy sometimes being in like the mezzanine or the balcony, because you don't have to make that decision versus like when you're right up in the main action, you're sort of like, oh man, okay,
where do I look?
Like if you're super close, it can get, and depending on the staging, it can get to the point where you're like, feel like you're watching a ping pong match.
Yeah.
I like being that close though because I get to see the little expressions.
I know.
But also, I think something interesting about this song, and actually just the structure of this entire show, is that Act 1 is entirely at camp. It's interesting dramaturgically because the midpoint of this book is not leaving camp. Like, we completely shift.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, having just watched the TV show, because they chose a very clear other midpoint, which was the arch.
Yeah.
And the arch is not even in this, really.
It's there for a second.
It's there for a second. So it's kind of fascinating to look at the structure of these two different adaptations because they both like found their act break in a different spot.
Yeah. Well, it's also just like that first act is so dedicated to like exposition. Here's the characters. Here's everything you need to know. And then it's like, okay, we're sending them off on their adventure. Now I have a split feeling about intermissions because it's just like, it's like, okay, I'm ready to go. Oh, now I have to sit here awkwardly and scroll on my phone for 15 minutes.
I will say, when I saw The Lightning Thief, though, I didn't have time to pee before. So by the time intermission hit, I was like, all right. But I didn't have time to pee.
No.
And so they were ringing the lights. The line was so long, so I came back and I almost peed my pants in Act 2 several times because of the jokes.
That's a good pull quote. They should use that for marketing for the show.
They should. You know, they used a pull quote from an article that I wrote once upon a time in the marketing of the show.
Did they really? What was it?
Did.
What?
I don't even remember, but I wrote like some kind of review of the off-Broadway version, and like it got picked up and they put it in their marketing.
That's so good.
Oh man, I didn't know that.
That marketing of the show too. The marketing of The Lightning Thief was like next level.
I think that was something else that like really let people in is like how it was like, this is a show for a specific audience and we're going to really engage with that specific audience in a way that makes them feel so welcome and like again gives you permission to have fun. Like, it is really good art and it has like a deep emotional meaning, but it's like, you know, the feelings are here as a consequence of you being here and enjoying yourself and having a good time.
And a lot of that,
like,
a lot of that comes back to Ashley Latimer, who they did the social media marketing and just killed it. Like, some of the best marketing I've seen that I think really paved the way for like the Dianas of the world, or like what Gatsby's doing now. Like,
all right, Act 2. Bus explosion. I want to point out there's this one line that I keep wanting to say in this conversation. I keep not saying it because I'm waiting for the song to come up. There's this one moment where they're all despairing and Percy says, I can't go back to any home. And Annabeth says, camp is way too far away. And Grover says, can't protect my only friends. And I was like, you spelled it all out. It's all right there. But I think that this is, especially for Percy, this is at the core of a couple of the conversations that we've been having about how lost he feels, how alone he feels. It feels like he has lost a home and that he's still trying to find a place where he belongs here. And again, he's finding it in people who see him clearly and hear him clearly.
Well, it's just like he's just lost his total sense of who am I, and he lost his mom. Like the one person who actually made him feel normal and accepted. How horrible.
Yeah. And in case we didn't touch on it earlier, she dies in this version.
Yeah.
Like, she's gone.
She's fully dead.
Oh, no fates in this version. I just realized.
They're across the street. They're at Hadestown.
Right.
Which they were across the street,
weren't they?
Yeah, it was literally just right across the street from Hadestown.
So we're lost in the woods.
Somewhere in New Jersey.
Somewhere in New Jersey, and...
Never going to make it to LA.
And we're never going to make it to LA. And Medusa appears. I do love the approach to this. I love that we keep Annabeth falling for the, like, oh, I'll turn you... Like, can I take your picture so that I can make a sculpture out of you? And that whole, like, appeal to her vanity.
But I felt like it was a little different in this version. It's like it's an appeal to her wanting to be immortal. Like yes, vanity, but it's more than that.
Yeah,
like,
no, the word I want is more like appeal to her, what she will explain in my grand plan. that want to be remembered and to have something solid that we've talked about in the past.
I noticed the underscoring under the Oracle and the underscoring under Medusa was almost identical.
Yeah. It is.
And I was thinking about that. And also, there's a little bit, in the Oracle scene, there's a Dies Irae.
Oh, yeah, there is. Didn't think about that. From Frozen 2,
that only comes... Of course. And that actually comes back in the underworld, as it should. But I thought it was interesting, there's like an almost like a triple Venn diagram of underscoring with Medusa, the Oracle, and the underworld. My interpretation of the Oracle and Medusa is it's like these are both meant to be the deeply unsettling pulls fully into the mythological worlds. The fact that the statues are shaking,
the like rattle the maracas that they've all got, genius.
I didn't even think about the fact that I didn't know it was a rattle. I just thought they were all like fighting against being a statue for a moment. Which
I feel like they're doing both because you could easily kind of do this without moving too much.
I read it as the snakes.
Yeah, I loved that visual addition to the scene too. It like creates horror in a very cool way.
Yeah.
But again, only in theater, really. Like, you can't get away with that in film.
And I think it's cool because it's like when you're there experiencing it live, it just adds a different dimension to it. It's hard to do like scary stuff on stage.
It is.
Yeah, the musical I'm currently working on is horror, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
To close out the Medusa scene, we do need to address the cut joke that I mourn every day.
Oh, yes.
Which was initially when, like, at least I saw, I think, like, third preview of the off-Broadway version, and Percy would, swing his sword at Medusa, and she would run off stage and be like, oh no, like, grabbing at her head, and then off stage yell out, oh no, my head, and then toss a basketball with fake snakes attached to it onto the stage.
That's so good.
And it was so funny. It was
Why
like
would they cut that?
The
That's
perfect
so
example of like that sort of low budget charm that they do very purposefully. I assume that they cut it because like you throw a basketball on stage and who knows where it's gonna
end up. That makes sense.
But I miss it so deeply when I watch this scene.
That's so good.
But the Medusa scene leads us into My Grand Plan, an iconic song. It is such a great insight into Annabeth. Like this is one of those moments that I felt like the show was illuminating something for me in the books that I hadn't thought about despite like analyzing these books for years, which was that the concept of the invisibility cap as a symbolic item that represents how unseen Annabeth feels. That's genius. I'm sorry. That's just...
Yeah.
Because it's never been presented like that in the books. But it absolutely is that.
It's a gift from her mom, too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like your mom gives you one gift, and it's that. Yeah.
Yeah.
To make you invisible.
And it's like she's kind of invisible to her mom, too.
Mm-hmm. It's a part of that massive theme that I was talking about earlier of like being seen and being heard and how important it is to be known by the people around you, and how important, from this song, how important having your story told is to that, because that is how these kids connect. It's like through this song that Annabeth and Percy really come together, and then like it's through the Tree on the Hill later on that we'll get to see, we'll get to know Grover on a much deeper level, and just the importance of hearing each other's stories.
It's wild because it's like this is one of, I think, the most important songs in the show, and it's just wild to me that it almost got cut multiple times. So good for Rob Rakiki and Kristen Stokes for fighting for it to keep it in.
No, I think it's so important also. Again, it just really gives us the non-Percy demigod perspective that I think, because I think without it too, a lot of what Luke's talking about isn't going to feel as impactful. Like that's sort of the thing, as she's sort of outlining this other perspective. And it's like, what does he want? Like when he talks about like how he wasn't saving the world on his quest, and it's all those like little underlying things where you can tell that he wants something else. Like it sort of explains that feeling in that way. And like how Luke keeps mentioning, like I've only met my dad once, and it was a blip basically, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's that same feeling.
You also have to applaud Kristen Stokes for her performance of Annabeth in this song.
Yes.
I will say, when I first saw it, I remember one of my biggest things, my takeaways was like, these actors are so dialed into these characters in such an amazing way. Like the performances, I thought like one of the reasons I couldn't talk about the material was because how great the performances were. Which is unusual for me because as a writer, like I have found I'm almost always focusing, as I'm sure you've experienced too, like when you're working on theater, you kind of tend to focus on the part that you know the most about, like the part that's your craft. But like in this case, nah.
Yeah.
Like it was the performances.
Yeah. Well, it's just like Kristen Stokes was there from the beginning. Like only missed, I think, one tour through the whole thing. And so to be able to like grow with that character through all of that time, it just really comes through.
And you could see it, I feel, after seeing many different versions of Kristen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I love how mean she is.
The whole,
it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm not.
The plan would have worked either way is like
no,
great.
I skipped that when we were there, but I wrote that down as that's a perfect line.
So we get another of my favorite jokes, which is the fact that the swirl came back and gave Grover 3 Amtrak tickets. It's like perfect streamlining.
I love that.
Because in the book, it's like, oh, the poodle says to bring us back to their very wealthy owner, and then we'll get the reward, and we'll use the reward to buy Amtrak tickets. And it's like, no, the squirrel gave me these.
And I think part of it is like the buy-in of how funny the squirrel scene is. And also it like there is a bit of a plant there of like, all right, like this show is so tight, like you can only, you know, there's a certain amount of like comeback of like, oh, Percy apologized to the squirrel, so we got the tickets. Okay.
Yeah. And it brings you straight into Drive, which is just powering through the majority of this book.
Yeah.
So
it's like we're going to spend the entirety of Act 1 at camp, but then for the quest, we got to go.
Right. This is not a quest story in any way, in the way that the book is.
That's a good way of looking at it. It's like you can really tell where their priorities are. And it's really, it comes out at, let's get to know these characters. What all happens in Drive? It's like,
we've got the Arch Casino. We have Ares, and like the
it's just like they meet, which that was a whole episode on Disney Plus, but here it's like it's just literally shoehorned into a song.
I love how we get Drive, and then we end of that again, Percy passing out and having a dream, in which is the single greatest time theater magic in this show serves this story, in our opinion. Which is letting Luke play himself without the audience knowing.
Yeah. This is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning. Luke can be on stage as Luke, and the audience will think nothing of it because everyone is like quadruple cast. Give his villainous moment, and no one knows.
Yeah. Only theater. This is the only place, the only medium you can do that.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work elsewhere.
And I didn't notice this line until the most recent time I reviewed it, but when he says, like, everything's unfolding as we planned, like he's
yeah.
I love that he's also given a bit more of an active role in the villainy in this. And it's interesting also, I wrote down the fact that Thalia is brought up in the context of Kronos saying sacrifices are necessary to remake the world, basically, which I thought was such an interesting transition into Tree on the Hill, because that is a song that is so about a sacrifice, but like from a completely different perspective of like, why did this have to happen? Like, I wish it didn't. Like, there's no reason this should have happened. It was a failure of so many different people, myself included, in Grover's perspective. So I thought it framed it in such an interesting way of like, we've got this villain saying sacrifice is required to remake the world, and then immediately one of our main characters rebutting that in such a beautiful, heartfelt moment.
Yeah.
It's like the grief of that and the impact and how it isn't necessary.
And it goes back to that philosophy that Joe Trace had when writing the show of like, this is how they say the world's supposed to be, but we don't really agree with that.
Yeah. God, this song is so good. It's one of those, my favorite thing in a song is when there's a moment that cuts to the heart, that just bears you to the bone. And that moment when and this is another one of those moments where me watching the show, my jaw dropped, like I've never thought about it this way, ever, was when he says, that tree is a symbol that protects everybody, is a symbol of my greatest failure.
Genius again.
That's what's so good about the writing, is that like for you two who you live, eat, and breathe Percy Jackson, to be able to come in and say, have you thought about it this way? And that you go, whoa, like what a testament to the writing of the book.
This is what kept me coming back.
Yeah. Like how nice. Instead of, hey, we're going to kill Medusa with an iPod Touch.
Which was genius and we love it.
It's so good. And that was one of the moments I think that stuck with me when the first time I saw it. That was the moment I kept coming back to and thinking about, where that one line where I was just like, man.
Yeah. To me, this is the best show. This is the best show of all time. To me, this is the best song in this musical. And is one of my favorite musical theater songs, I'd say.
George Salazar really lucks out. Got Tree on the Hill and Michael in the Back Room right in a row.
Really, yeah. That resume.
Oh, and I love the staging of this moment where it's Annabeth and Luke forming the tree with Thalia. As like, to me, it reads as like them leaving a piece of themselves with her, or a piece of themselves growing into the tree with her, dying with her. It's just a very, I love that choreography that's happening up on that second level.
Yeah. And this is where I remember when we saw the middle school production, I asked Phoebe, like, what was, like, to her the most impactful moment in the show? And you said because they found the tiniest little sixth graders to be those people. Because in the middle school production, they didn't have to multi-role. In fact, they broke it up as much as humanly possible, including having everybody a titled character in the underworld sequence.
Wow.
But they found the tiniest little sixth graders, I assume, to be these younger versions of all of these characters. And so they actually matched the ages.
That's so good.
Phoebe has made this observation. I can't take credit for this, but they matched the ages of what these children would have been. And they're so small.
Yeah. It hits you so hard when you see them acting out that moment.
Which is like, that's another great thing about having this as a live piece of theater, is that it's living. And so you get all of these different interpretations and readings of them. I know that that's something that Joe Trace was talking about when I interviewed him, was that he loves how many people you can have in this show. And he said the line, he's like, yeah, you can play, like, usually it's pretty lame to play a tree, but in this one, it's like you can be the tree, and that's awesome. Like, you get to be the tree.
The tree of all time.
Yeah.
They made the program really funny, though, because it's like Percy Jackson character, Percy Jackson cherry, Johann Bach. Oh, okay. And then we go into the whole underworld. Speaking of which.
Yeah, DOA. Brilliant song, once again. I love this one. I think it's so funny to, like, actually have Charon have, like, their real passion is music. Like, that's why it's in a record company.
I love that they, like, added an explanation.
It's not just a joke about LA and LA culture. It's...
That is one of the funniest parts of the book to me, is how much Rick hates LA.
He hates LA so much.
I don't know why. I don't know why he would.
I wonder if his opinions have changed now that he's a Hollywood boy.
I do want to talk a little bit about the lightning bolt, because I mentioned I do like how they immediately turn to Annabeth and think it's her, but it makes sense to me because her objective this whole time has been to, like, be remembered and do great things. And her, more than Luke, I feel like at this point, at least more recently in the memory of the audience, has been built up as the kind of person who would do this. And I believe their suspicion of her.
Yeah, you're building off of that very brief moment in The Lightning Thief where Luke maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally, implies that because Annabeth has the invisibility cap, she could have done this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know they bring it up. That doesn't even come up in this conversation, but it could have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that her objective was so strong, they didn't
even need to do that.
Yeah, we meet Hades.
Comes out and he says, "Hey, little songbird."
Okay, this was my question for y'all, which was, how do we feel about the fact that Percy's arc is, the culmination of his arc is the song Son of Poseidon? And it's him, like, what do we think that means for him? Is, like, what about Poseidon, being the son of Poseidon, is he embracing in this moment? Because we sort of asked this as well with the TV show, when he summons the water and he says, "I'll show you who I really am," and stuff. Like, it feels like a similar moment to me, but it feels so different too. Because I think the show built out Percy's relationship with his godly parent more in a positive direction, or at least as the audience it did. To us as the audience it did. Versus in this musical, I feel like we've only ever seen Poseidon a little and played for laughs. And if you don't know the story, you probably don't even know that was Poseidon. So I was curious, because I wrote down a few possibilities. I was like, is this him accepting Poseidon, or is he accepting his legacy? Or more what I was leaning towards was like, is this actually, it's not about the gods at all, but it's him accepting his place and his powers within this world.
I would think that one's a little bit more closer.
That feels like a large part of it. There are the lines where he says, maybe my dad was a screw up too, his best laid plans always falling through. Maybe he did the best that he could do. Maybe my dad wasn't always there. Maybe he never knew how to care. But hey, that's life, and life ain't fair. It's when he realizes that his dad gave him the seashell so that he could escape the underworld. So it is a bit of like a realization that his dad has reached out to him, which that is the turning point in a lot of these adaptations. It just comes much later in the journey. So it's also a bit of him realizing that he does have someone who's trying to connect with him, and that he isn't alone in this, and that he might actually be being listened to. Also in this song is the Ares Percy fight with the Put You in Your Place reprise.
Yes. It's so interesting because reprise is really not used that much in this show. I do enjoy, though, because we've introduced it with Clarice and Ares, we do get that connection between them with the reprise.
Especially with, at the end, Clarice... I don't remember if she still says this. It's really tricky, the fact that I've seen so many different versions of this. But when at the end she says, she has that line of like, "Oh, you met my dad? Did he mention me?" And it's like, in a way he did. He did channel your energy for a moment. Or did you channel his, though? Really setting us up for Clarice to take over for Sea of Monsters, the musical.
Yes. Sequels always work on Broadway.
Yes,
it's true.
Sequels are always good in musical theater.
My love for them never died.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about the Good Kid reprise?
Since we're on this topic of reprises,
we have to.
This whole betrayal scene was interesting. First of all, my reaction to it was, I think, the exact reaction they were going for as an audience member, because I'm sitting here like, where's the scorpion? It's like one of the few times I've been probably an obnoxious audience member where, like, as soon as he pulls out the knife, I just turned to him and, oh my god, he's got a knife. So I don't usually react like that to theater, but I did in this moment because I was like, what?
It's such a moment.
It was funny though, because I reread The Lightning Thief for our podcast after seeing the show. And that moment sticks out so much. But then there's a moment in the book where Luke and Percy are just having what seems like a normal conversation, but he's holding and playing with a knife the whole time, and they keep bringing it back, like bringing the attention back to the knife in the book.
In the book.
And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's where this came from. I wonder if they saw this, they read this scene of like Luke playing with this knife and were like...
Well, there's the early version of this where he wasn't stabbed, and instead Luke would have his hand in a fist and then go scorpion and throw his fist out as if he threw something when there was clearly nothing in his hand, which was really funny, but it meant that I went into the show expecting the silly little scorpion moment at the end, so I was so
and then he pulls out a knife. Oh no.
It's so good. It's such a great twist on that moment.
Somebody call an ambulance.
But not for me. That's exactly. That's very similar to the line he says.
There's something about this came up in the show we're currently working on, where there's a lot of fantasy, magic, and violence happening, and we did a reading of it and we were like, how are we going to convey in a reading setting that this character hurts and kills this other character? And our director just went, I just do the knife, like knife stab twist, when it's supposed to be magic in the show. But that like one little action, it changed it. It made it like feel so much more real. It like really made it visceral in such like, there's something about, I think also
it's the
like
twist.
Yeah, it's the twist. It's also like seeing it right in before your eyes in a way that you never will when you have a screen separating you. It just, or the pages of a book in your imagination. It just like really impacts you.
Mm-hmm. There's that one line in Hannibal. There's that one line in Hannibal where I think Hannibal asks Will how he would kill him if he were to kill him, and he says, with my hands. And it's because guns lack intimacy.
It's like a Joker thing too. It's like the Dark Knight.
Yeah. And so it's that sort of like that very physical moment between them. Plus they add the whole sword fight. They were the first to do it. It was revolutionary when the TV show did it, but
We didn't even touch on the fact that Annabeth is the one who teaches Percy how to sword fight in this version.
Yes, not Luke. In a way, is this a proxy battle between Annabeth and Luke?
Which helped keep my grand plan in the show because they figured out where they could put it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I do like it a lot. And I do like we use like Percy's newness as and as friction between him and Annabeth. Like his newness to this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they kind of swap their roles in a way, because a lot of the beginning of The Lightning Thief, Percy's actually learning a lot from Annabeth. Even though he kind of looks at Luke as a mentor, Annabeth is the one who's actually teaching him about this world, but instead they kind of swap it. Annabeth does still deliver her same lines, but Luke is the one who's really guiding him and being that presence through camp.
Yeah.
Because Luke he repeats the line, put you in your place, but then also Good Kid reprises. So he kind of gets both of these moments.
Mm-hmm. There was a moment that didn't exist in the later versions that I saw, where when he said it's time someone put them in their place, he and Percy had established a little like secret handshake, and they would do it at that point, but Percy did it like really kind of hesitantly, like, what are we talking about right now? I agree with you, but what are we doing right now?
I do like that. A secret handshake does so much. I just saw Wicked again, and I was thinking like, oh wow, that secret handshake between Fiyero and his driver. Mm-hmm. It tells you so much.
Yeah, but it's this moment of Luke actually thinking that Percy could join him instead of trying to kill him immediately the way that he does in the book. Mm-hmm. There's also this one line I want to point out where Percy says to Luke, he's using you to get back at the gods, and Luke says good before launching into the start of his reprise, which is not dissimilar from what he says in the book. We talked about Luke's approach to his own agency in The Lightning Thief in that scene, because he says, like, Percy says he's using you, and Luke is like, look at yourself. Like, basically, we're all being used. Who do you want to be used by? So I just like that little moment is still here.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's that thing where it's like, there's so much in the book that is not in this musical in terms of that world building and like what the impact of what's happening and what will happen. Yeah, to me, that moment, I agree. I like that.
So the way that this moment ends is with this big sword fight, which the other campers are all witness to. Like, the whole camp comes out and witnesses Luke's betrayal, which is an easy way to sidestep people having to explain to anyone what happened. But the really new part here is that Annabeth also comes in and sees it, which, again, happens in the TV show, but happened here first.
I thought the audience element was interesting, too, in light of, like, the stuff I was bringing up about all of the campers feeling much more involved in this story, like it being all of their story instead of just Percy's. It closes the book on that in a nice way, too, for me.
I also put a little star next to this in regard to the being seen motif that I was following, of the, like, Luke actually being seen for who he is by the entire camp. And it kind of ruins him to be seen by everyone.
Which it's also a thing of, like, the show. Like, this is all you get for the show. Unlike the book where you have 4 other times to explore it, or the TV series where you have other seasons. It's like, this is the end of this story. So how do we tie up 5 books worth of stuff?
And that was sort of my last question is, like, how do we feel about Bring On the Monsters as an ending? Like,
so good.
Yeah.
Written as, I don't want to get too political, but it was written as a direct result of Donald Trump getting elected.
Oh, I did not know that, but that makes sense.
Well, there's this entire theme in this song that I think brings out the theme in the rest of it, but it's really, really concentrated in this song, which is that idea that Percy says of, Luke was right about one thing, we can't wait at camp for our parents to fix things. We have to do it ourselves. And it's that idea that we, again, talked a lot about when we were reading the original series, about those generations and like who is going to actually make a change here, responding to the way that your parents and the earlier generation have created the world around you.
And I find the real world lyric kind of impactful in that way too, where it's like, right, we haven't really been living in the real world, let's come back to it.
It's like you can't stay behind these walls forever.
Because it also, again, it like forces you to be like, okay, what am I going to do to, you know, fight the monsters in my life? Like, you know, it does ask that question of you and bring you, the audience, into it too.
And I love that it ends, that the last line of the song is, I'll be back next summer. I appreciate that Percy's first line of the show is his actual first line in the book, and his last line of the show is partially his last line in the book, because his last line in the book is, I'll be back next summer. I'll survive until then. After all, I am your son. It's one of those moments where you're like, these guys actually appreciate these books, and that's so refreshing.
I'm curious how the response to this also will be now that the show is out too, because I feel like one of the beautiful things about the musical was, after having seen the movie, like seeing an adaptation where people clearly cared so much was so beautiful.
Well, it's like was behind every decision. It was what is staying true to the book and what is staying true to the fans. Like the respect that the team had for the fans is unbelievable.
And there are all these little things, like we've mentioned a couple of them already, but there's one in this song where like those final lines, you get a lot of bring on the real world, a bit of drive, you get normal as a myth and all that, but you also get, we'll make them listen to us, we'll make them listen, which is sung by Luke. It's sung by Selena. You hear the two of them singing that line, and you can take it one way.
Sequel setup.
It's a sequel setup, but I mean that like it's dropping in a plotline that does not need to be addressed right now. It doesn't, like we are 5 books too early to be talking about Selena in this way, but we are talking about Selena in this way.
Lightning never dies. It's coming up.
Oh God.
We have a question that we close out all of our episodes with. In the Lightning Thief book, a bead is designed to represent that summer at Camp Half-Blood, and on that bead is it's a black bead with a trident. Too boring. We don't want to do that. What would we, based on the Lightning Thief musical, feel is representative enough of this story that we want to put it on our end of summer bead?
A roll of toilet paper.
Ooh,
yes, I love how immediate that was.
Honestly, the one I feel like is the most whimsical to me, and it's also the joke that almost made me pee my pants, would be tartar sauce.
Just a jar of tartar sauce.
That's a good one.
What I want to put on it is a basketball with snakes attached to it.
With the snakes on it.
But because that's not still in the show.
It's like an in memoriam.
It is. You know what? I'm keeping it. I was going to say like...
It's like Talia's tree. Or Thalia's tree.
Same level of tragedy.
It is. It really is. Because the other option I was going to go with was maybe like a representation of the tree made of those 3 characters.
Toilet paper.
Made of toilet paper. But if I can keep Medusa's head in memoriam, I will. Thank you all for listening to Monster Donut.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Oh my God, it's been so much fun. Please tell the people where they can find you, what you've been working on, anything else you want to let them know about.
Yeah, if you want to learn more about how the Lightning Thief musical came to be, we've got a 40-minute documentary on Wait in the Wings on YouTube where we interview pretty much the entire creative team and actors with it. So it's right now it's titled like Gods and Toilet Paper, the Percy Jackson story. But then you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Wait Wings.
Highly recommend.
Next time. Who knows?
Who the fuck knows?
Who knows?
It's probably Wrath of the Triple Goddess.
Oh, actually, honestly, yeah. It probably is.
Damn.
It was not supposed to be. I guess we're slowly approaching a wrap-up episode of the Percy Jackson arm of the Rortonverse. I think we have maybe a couple more books left, and then we'll be done. So if you've got questions about anything, it doesn't have to be about the stuff that we're talking about between the show and then. It can be about literally any of the Percy Jackson stuff. We're wrapping up all of the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles. So if you have any of those questions, you can send them to monsterdonutpodcast@gmail.com or get in touch with us on social media at PJOpod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Or you can comment on this episode on Spotify, which allows me to reply to comments now. Groundbreaking.
If you also are at all interested in checking out our merch, you can do so on monsterdonut.redbubble.com, and it's also linked in our link tree. And if you also are interested at all in supporting us monetarily over on Patreon, that is always appreciated, and we thank you so much. It really helps us out. If you want to support us in a non-monetary way, which is equally as appreciated, if you leave us a rating or a review on wherever you're listening to your podcast, that's really great. Or if you know anybody who you think might enjoy this podcast, let them know. To that end, speaking of our patrons,
thank you to our patrons: Latino Kaya, Patty VCK, Bethany from Public Works, Sydney Fox, Joke, Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, Charlie McNeil, Bronte Lebo, Ethan Not Nakamura, The Damn Meme Page, Kels, Mason Bowman, Casey Cassidy, Busy Cat, Natalia Sanchez, Melissa Rounds, Oat Milk, Alana, Elena, Melanie Valdez, Pamela Ion, The Kid on Her Own, Grace Hunker, Kaylee, Mano Monshin, Amy Shu, Calamity, Eddie Burns, Elva Tang, and Sarah Brown. We appreciate you very much. All right, until next time.
Thank you all for listening.
So long. Goodbye.
Bye.